fantastiskt fina diamanter, stora stenar. Och det ska bolagets VD William Lamb berätta mer om. Så William?
Well, thank you very much for coming to listen to the Lucara story. I will apologize. It seems like it's been ages since I was last here. But the weather's pretty decent outside, so I'm not going to complain. I'll just say that I brought your summer with me. We're here to give you a bit of an update on where we are with Lucara. And I know that there's most probably sort of some concerns. And before you even start, you've met Robert. Just behind Robert is Tana Jaskurlik. She is our investor relations and PR lady. She joined us at the beginning in December last year, so feel free to sort of direct any questions towards her as well, just so I don't have to take all the heat. So we'll just jump straight into it. We are going to cover quite a few things. If I'm talking too quickly, just wave your hand. I do have a habit of getting too excited and then talking quicker than what sort of most people can hear it. But I'll start off by I like the picture, and I talked to this slide in conjunction with the next slide as well. And it's really because the picture shows, I know that there'll be one or two questions possibly about the mining contract, so I'll cover that one as we go through. But I know that there's been a lot of questions in the market. I'm going to address three things. Number one, the mining contractor. Number two, what everybody believes suddenly that the Lesedi is worth based on the sale of the 373 carat stone. And anybody who sold their stock last week because they were concerned about it, well, I'm sorry about that. And then sort of where we are as far as production is concerned, capital projects, because I think those are the things where people have concerns, and we now just want to sort of cover that off as well. So just moving on to the investment case. Why should you actually invest in Lucara, and what is it that makes us special? And the first thing is obviously our Karowe mine. As Robert pointed out, it is a significant generator of more value than what I think we would ever have believed when we first put this mine into production. And as an example now, that very first point there, where we say we've recovered 100, or we've sold, as of 2 Thursdays ago, 145 diamonds for more than $1 million. And even though that's the truth, it's not the full truth, because those 145 diamonds have sold for a total of $528 million. And that's about 3.5 billion Swedish crowns for 145 diamonds, which technically I could have most of them in my pockets. When you sort of look at the average, and yes, it does include sort of some very high value stones, and there's a slide later which actually talks to the value of those, but we're looking at more than $3 million a stone. So 21 million crowns per diamond is the average which we've had over the past 4 years. Taking that further, what have we then done with that money, apart from pay royalty and taxes, operating costs, employment, all those other fun things which we leave in country? We've now paid out more in dividends than the entire sum of equity which we've ever raised in the market. Now I challenge you to actually go out and find 5 mining companies who can actually say the same thing. You'll struggle. I've spoken to a lot of investment bankers, people that have looked at and worked in the mining industry for a long, long time. And nobody can actually say that they found, I think we're on 2, including us, of companies who have actually been able to say that in a 4-year period, since we started mining in the Centre and South Lobe, we've generated sufficient revenue to actually pay back all the money that we actually went to people like yourselves, the shareholders, to ask for. But what most people seem to miss, and I'll mention this again when we talk to the capital projects, is over the past 4 years, we have actually also spent $100 million on upgrading the process plant to enable us to recover that value. So if we look to the next 4 years, even if we duplicate what we've done, we know that there's even going to be more money to actually look for opportunities to develop the underground, for paying back our shareholders, or paying back to shareholders. So from here, because our capital programs are coming to an end, the financial standing of Lucara is actually only going to get stronger. And I already mentioned the balance sheet thing. Only thing I'm going to talk about on this slide is sort of at the end of the quarter, we still had $43 million. That doesn't include any of the revenue which came in. Happy to say, all $54.8 million from the exceptional stone tender 2 weeks ago has now been collected. And I was on a call just before we came across here. Everything is set up. we already have a very strong contingent of bookings for our regular tender for this quarter. So where we're trending, if you do the math, $26.8 million for the regular tender in the first quarter, 55 odd for the exceptional stone tender. It's not going to take much to get to the $110 million of sales in the first half, which then leads into our guidance of $220 million, which we're targeting for the year. Another thing which I actually want to point out, and it's another one of those, I think, distinguishing factors when we look at Lucara. You have to go all the way back to November 2013. I can't remember back that far. Is the last time that we actually used any of our debt facility. So again, you'd be very hard pressed to find definitely diamond companies, and I know that all other diamond companies actually hold at least a certain portion of debt, a lot of them more than what they should hold. But even mining companies, most of them actually have debt, and it's one of the things which we don't have, but it's a good and a bad thing, because there's certain ways in which we can lever up when we start to look at projects going forward, where we can take advantage of the balance sheet, the strong cash flows which we've got, and I think the access to available funds without having to look at dilution. So the only reason why we have this curve in is because after the exceptional stone tender, and oddly enough, history has told us that our share price ramps up before the exceptional stone tender, and then we have a tough time the days after. Oddly enough, it was possibly even worse this time because there were a number of people that suddenly assumed that $46,000 a carat, which is what we sold the 373 carat stone for, is the value of the Lesedi. So, hands up who actually owns a diamond or has bought a diamond sometime in their life. Should be most of you. And when you went into Tiffany or whoever you went to and you said, I'm looking for it started with 1 carat stone. And they said, yes ma'am, or yes sir, that's going to cost you X. And you said, well, what about a 2 carat stone? And that's when you got the surprise, because it's not 1 plus 1 equals 2. When it comes to diamonds, it's 1 plus 1 actually equals a huge amount more money. And that's what people seem to have missed. The 373 carat stone, yes, it will produce a phenomenal stone. Anywhere from maybe 140, maybe 150 carats in the polished. How can anybody actually draw the conclusion that the Lesedi at 1,100 carats, which will produce definitely a stone over 300 carats, is going to be the same value in $1 per carat? And I'm going to come back to the Lesedi because I know that there are going to be questions, and we're going to kill all of those before those questions actually come up. So when the exceptional stone tender results were announced, I don't think it was $55 million for 15 stones. I would consider that to be a pretty good day in the office. Oddly enough, everybody drew the wrong conclusion, and we saw our share price drop. And the amount of hate mail that I get and that Tanergy gets because people don't understand the story, I'll actually say it's actually quite frustrating. If you have a question, ask a question about the company. Don't ask, what am I doing for shareholders? Because this curve, and if you plot all other non-listed diamond producers on the same curve, we're at 305% return to shareholders over the 5-year. There's only one other that is in the plus. Everybody else is in the minus. So when people say, what are we doing for shareholders? You only have to look at what information is available, knowing that diamond prices are fairly difficult to find, to understand where we've actually been. So if we jump into Karowe and we look at the highlights. I haven't been here for a while, so we do have the 2016 highlights, and we can talk about the quarterly highlights as we go through. So through last year, just another phenomenal year for us. Oddly enough, if we sell the Lesedi this year, or we monetize the Lesedi, let's put it at that, there's no reason why we're not going to have very similar numbers. But what management has actually done is we've looked at how do we manage our tax rate? How do we manage the balance sheet and get as much money onto the bottom line as possible? So the capital programs which we have this year, the stripping which actually helps us in years to come, are all designed to make sure that we can maximize the free cash flow through the year with the value that we've got in terms of our regular and exceptional tenders, as well as the potential if we do get any money in for the Lesedi. So last year, obviously characterized by the sale of the Constellation at $63.1 million. It did increase our tax rate quite substantially from 32% up to 45%, and that's for profits for the entire year. So we want to be able to manage that in terms of when we actually maximize our revenue through the sale of all the stones which we've got. So earnings for the year, 19 cents versus 21 cents the year before. Again, primarily driven by, or slightly lower, a lot of it was exchange rates. 2015 for us was an absolute slam dunk. The dollar was getting stronger, the pula and the rand were dropping, and last year it just pretty much stayed flat. So a lot of those things playing into it. And then we got a slide later where we actually talk about the exploration, the resource extension, and where we are with that. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. These are sort of old numbers that looks at sort of where we are 2015 versus 2016. And I think the most impressive thing is that all the numbers are actually still very, very healthy. And I think that's why people like yourselves actually own Lucara stock. It's because of the strength that we have, not just in the asset, but in the balance sheet, and how we've actually managed it to ensure that there is continuous sustainable returns for our shareholders, money that we can actually pay as a dividend, and the continuation and increase in that dividend. So every time I've come here, there's always been a question around the value of our diamonds. And it's a very difficult question to answer. So the next 3 slides should actually help with a little bit of understanding, a little bit of education of what, again, differentiates Lucara from most other people, or most other diamond mining companies. So the bar on your far right there, actually, you can see just how different it is to everything else, where up to 80% of our revenue comes from diamonds which are larger than 10.8. So I'm going to put this into a little bit of context, a little bit of math here. But I'm going to come back to that. 2 slides down, I don't want to jump into it. So we actually are very much levered towards our larger stones, and that's where our revenue comes from. Interestingly enough, what we've seen in buying behavior over the last, most probably 3 years, is where we used to have a lot of clients coming in and they would focus on the smaller stones. So 4 to 8 grainers, which is a 1 to 2 carat stone in the rough, would be polished into most probably a 0.7 to 1 carat final stone. The number of attendees which we have has actually dropped slightly in those sizes, but the number of people we have coming to bid for our single stones, and it's because of the quality of the stone. So if we have a single stone which is 15, 20, 25 carats, a nice white stone, on one stone we will get up to 40 people putting in a bid on that stone, and all of them are clustered. They're really, really close together. There's always an outlier, a slightly higher price, and they're the ones that win it. But the demand for our diamonds, and I'm always willing to bet every single time that we get more than 30 bids on a single stone, they will way exceed our reserve price. And we see that on a regular basis. So what we actually have through that, and what the miner's actually been able to do, is our sales and operations manager calls it a cult following. We actually have people that phone us 6 weeks before the next tender going, when are you going to launch it? What's going to be in there? Just because there's such a high demand for our diamonds. And that's also what assists the average dollar per carat. But when you look at last quarter's results, so $26.8 million in diamond sales, and everybody's, oh, it's terrible. And I think a lot of people go, well, 26.8 times 4, that gives me 100. How on earth are they going to get to 200 to 220? And oddly enough, you're never going to get that. So the reason why we put this curve in, and there's a number of things I want to explain. Firstly, people will go, well, hang on a second. Here you had 3 exceptional stone tenders, and there you had 3. But I would have mentioned this in previous presentations. When we started out in 2013 with our exceptional stone tenders, we'd gone back to the market and we'd said to our buying clients, what do they consider as an exceptional stone? And the feedback that we got was any single stone worth $250,000 or more. So that's the criteria which we used. And oddly enough, we were recovering quite a few of them, which enabled us to have 3 tenders, second, third, and fourth quarter of 2013. As we continued to mine in the center lobe and then into the south lobe, in 2014, we actually changed that criteria. So if you had $500,000, you would then come to our tender in 2014. And these 3 tenders, 1, 2, 3, were tenders where all of the stones had a minimum reserve price based on our valuation of $500,000. And as we continued to mine and we continued to produce more of these stones, we changed the criteria again. That's why in 2015, 2016, there's only 2 tenders for the year. It's not that we're recovering less diamonds, it's the fact that we actually changed the bottom cutoff criteria. So if you had $950,000 in your pocket and you came to our exceptional stone tender, on the off chance, you might actually win a stone, but there's a better than average chance that you won't. So as we've increased the bottom cutoff size, it's obviously decreased the number of stones we have. That's why that is different. But if you then take this bar over here and you split it into 3 and you add 1 there, 1 there, 1 there, and you do the same for this one, the same for that one, the same, there's another bar that's going to come underneath here for Q2. And you do that, you will actually see that on average per quarter, the revenue generated will be between $50 and $60 million. We've done this curve specifically so that people can see that the consistent recovery, and it's the recovery that we're looking at now when you start to split that, not when you sell them. Some of the stones we hold on to for 6, 9, sometimes 12 months. So it's difficult to actually see what the revenue is on a regular basis, but this curve at least gives you a little bit of flavor that the regular generation of sustainable revenue is definitely coming through. So this is where we get to do some math, because I still have people asking me, are the large stones going to continue? So what this does, it actually shows you 2013, 14, 15, and 16. The cumulative percentage plus 10.8 carat stones which have been recovered through the year. Don't worry about this big blue line over here. That's the recovery of the Constellation and the Lesedi over a 2-day period. It throws the data out completely because that's the equivalent of recovering 20 100 carat stones over the period of 48 hours. So it does kind of throw the data out there. But what you see is, at the end here, we're looking at sort of around about 4.8 to 5% weight percent special. So diamonds of the entire production which are larger than 10.8. And people go, well, let's round off to 5% because the math is much easier. People go, well, that's only 5%. What does that actually mean? So if you go back to the resource statement which we put out in 2014, which we'll update this year, it talks to 3.5 to 3.8% of the production should be, based on the analysis in a fairly large sample, larger than 10.8. What we're now recovering is 1.5% more than that. So you go, okay, well, 1.5%, that doesn't sound like a lot. Let's break it down. We're going to sort of produce probably 300,000 carats this year. 1.5% of that is only 4,500 carats. But the value of those diamonds, because of their size, averages around $8,000 a carat. So that 1.5% additional plus 10.8 carat stones equates to well in excess of $48 million. So when we talk about percentages, a 0.2, 0.3, 0.4% increase in what we actually see coming out of the resource actually adds significantly to the amount of revenue which the resource will generate. So just as a bit of a why you should own it. As we now mine more and more material from the South Lobe, a lot of the material which we've been putting through the process plant this year has actually been from the South Lobe or South Lobe stockpile material. 5% is a very low number compared to what we have been. But again, we've covered a significant portion of our production has been larger than 10.8 and well in excess of the 5%. But I have to have the caveat there that you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a princess. We have some very ugly diamonds. I got a presentation just before I came here with what we recovered over the past week. There are some really ugly diamonds in there. But amongst the ugly ones, there are also the very, very nice white ones, which is where the demand comes from, where a lot of our revenue comes from. So hopefully sort of the past 3 slides will give you a little bit of comfort that what we've been able to achieve over the past 4 years, what we're getting to the end of in terms of our capital programs, the technology which we've adopted will continue to add value, which is shown here. So just very briefly, we've already spoken about the cash position. I'm hoping that some of you actually held stock in July last year because this decrease over here is now in your pockets. And it is one of the things we sat and we looked at. It was a long discussion that Lucas and I had about what were we going to do with the money. Number one, we weren't going to waste it. But having sort of the Fed through the last 2 years, they have a meeting and everybody gets excited. They're going to increase interest rates, and then they don't, and everybody's disappointed. So us sitting with $200 million in the bank, generating almost no interest, whereas we could give it back to you. You can invest it in London Gold or Africa Oil or whichever one, and potentially make a quicker return than what we would be able to generate. Well, that was your choice to make. And so we actually gave the money back because it would add more value to the investors than what we would be able to do with it in the short term, knowing that the resource continues to deliver and we continue to generate those revenues which have allowed us to do this in the past 4 years. Coming back to that specifically, we look at what we're actually doing with the dividends. And in 2015, when we converted from just the standard dividend to a progressive dividend, and this is a fun thing. So I think, Robert, over the years, there's been at least 20 different Lundin Group companies. They've come and gone, some of them are still there. And the beauty of being a Lundin Group company is we get to share information. So if there's something you don't have an answer to, you go to Keith, you go to Paul, and you ask them questions, and they should have an answer. When we decided to pay a dividend, not a single one of the London companies had ever paid a dividend. So anyway, this is new because nobody in the group actually had the experience and the knowledge of what to expect. So us paying the dividends in 2014 was a little bit of a novel thing. And I think as we went through the end of 2015, we realized that going to the progressive dividend was going to add a lot more value, changing it to a quarterly payment where we could actually sort of pay it on a regular basis and people could actually then hold on to the stock for longer. Because we've seen every time we pay a special dividend, and I can jump back to the curve and show you, there's always that drop afterwards where people who are not the educated investors will come and buy, and as soon as the dividend is paid, out they go again, and they wait for the next opportunity to buy in again. But frustrating from our point because we don't have any control over when those people are going to buy and when they're going to sell. So we've now gone to a progressive dividend. We were at 4 cents, then 6 cents, so 50% increase. We're at 10 cents this year, 67% increase. Are we hoping to increase it next year? Yes. We do plan to sort of potentially go to 12 cents again next year. Yeah, and I think it's another sort of demonstration of just what the company is actually able to do with the resource which we have. We also have some very nice pictures, and Tanager has promised that we'll put a gallery on the website. We had a professional photographer in about 6 weeks ago. So oddly enough, when they send you sort of 10 to 15 megabyte pictures and there's about 6,000 of them, it takes quite a while to download. So we are in the process of putting that together. But they've had, one of the things which I did want to point out just on this picture, that is not the sump which we actually created originally to store water. That's the entire bottom mining level. Botswana has most probably had, it must be, if not the highest rainfall in 100 years, definitely in more than 50 years. So as we did the transition, I'm going to talk about the mining contractor here. As we did the transition to the new mining contractor, there was a 2-month period where there was no activity in the pit. Oddly enough, if you were a geologist, you would have been like a kid in a candy store. There was no dust, there'd been lots of rain, so all of the faces were washed in any sort of dust. So you could see just beautiful mantle material, mantle zenithus, the size of your head. It was just absolutely beautiful, where you could actually see those parts 200, which actually are brought up from 200 kilometers below the Earth's crust. Just a beautiful example of what a kimberlite should look like, and oddly enough, what this one that generates this volume of large stones actually looks like. So, with the transition to the new mining contractor, they mobilized to site on the 1st of March. And the previous mining contractor were running around about 1,400 ton trucks and a fairly large fleet of smaller trucks. 6-wheel drive articulated trucks, which actually are fairly costly to run. The new mining contractor has mobilized 3 very large shovels. They will load a 100-ton truck in 3 loads. And they've got 35 trucks on site, of which we're running 28. What it's done is it's actually given us a lot more flexibility to move forward with the waste stripping, to get access to the full surface area of the South Lobe. So a lot of the meetings which we've done today, the South Lobe is a topic of discussion. It is where the significant amount of revenue is generated. Average value for the South Lobe is well now in excess of $800 a carat, potentially higher than that. And when you're mining $130, $140 per ton rock, and it's costing you around $25 without the waste, or $20 without the waste, about $26 because we're doing a lot of waste this year to mine, it is where you want to be. It generates a significant return in terms of what this ore can actually do. So the waste which we're moving this year in conjunction with a new mining contractor is actually bringing forward. We're going to have to move the waste anyway. Doing it this year, doing it next year, doing it the year after. If we've got the money and it manages sort of our cash flow this year, we may as well do it now. But what it's doing is it's actually opening up optionality for us in terms of where we're going to be mining and how much South Lobe material we can actually access. And this is where I normally draw a picture, but we don't have a whiteboard, so we'll skip it. But otherwise, that new mining contractor, a much larger sort of company in terms of the number of contracts which it has in Southern Africa. I'm very, very pleased with the way they're performing so far. And oddly enough, it comes in at about 10% cheaper than the previous mining contractor. So over and above, it's actually been a very, very good move for us. We have much greater flexibility, much better efficiencies, and it's a lower cost. So looking at the performance of the mine over 2016, actually very good numbers. The waste mine is slightly below. Oddly enough, that's why we have a new mining contractor, and we believe it's now 58 days time, we'll be fully up to speed with where we should be according to the amount of material we need to move this year and what we actually had planned. The important numbers here are those two. So anybody who is looking at the diamond market at the back end of 2015 would have seen that everybody was screaming foul. Rough diamond prices were too high. Oddly enough, we should actually put another column in there for what we sold in 2014. And you'd see that that's an increase. I think it was, speaking under the correction, 456. So we went from $456 a carat average to 593 to 649. And I talk about the 649 because the 824 includes the sale of the Constellation, the 813 carat stone for $63 million. So where everybody else is screaming foul, yes, we have seen a decrease in certain categories of the rough diamonds which we sell. But when De Beers says diamond prices are down by 10%, if I flip back to that chart which had the big blue block in terms of where our revenue comes from, it only affects around about 2% or 20%. So if whatever De Beers says diamond prices are down, take sort of 1/5 of that number, and that's what it actually affects us. But as people have seen diamond prices decrease, and a lot of companies have sort of gone, oh, well, where our margins are getting tighter, we've actually seen our average dollar per carat increase. And where we sit at the moment, yes, we do have a regular tender to still sell, but for the exceptional stone tender, which would have been a lot of the diamonds recovered back end of last year into the first quarter of this year, plus our regular tender, that number currently sits at $1,200 a carat. Yes, we do have the regular tender, which will probably decrease it, but it's still going to end up in the range of one of these very high numbers. Again, testament to the quality of the asset which we have. So you should, it's a much better picture. So this is on the capital projects which we have. So our MDR, Mega Diamond Recovery, I love doing this. So the Mega Diamond Recovery, it's a nice name. The MDR, it rolls off the tongue quite nicely, and it's recovered, or it's being put in place with a potential top size of 120 millimeters. That's 5,000 carats. And I'm sure all of you who are going, well, you haven't sold a 1,000 carat stone, how on earth are you going to sell a 5,000 carat stone? That's not the objective of the Mega Diamond Recovery. The unit, or the unit processes which we're adding in there, and just for those who have never been to site, this is the primary crusher. There's a conveyor that comes out. Normally, the way that the ore would go, it would come, there's a crusher in there, so oversized material would go out to your secondary crusher, it comes back, goes up into stockpile. There's about a 6 or 8 meter drop. So if you're standing on at the head pulley for the conveyor, your feet would be above the roof here. And if you were holding the Lucara, which is quite a chunky stone, so it's not the real thing, otherwise I'm sure somebody would be rugby tackling. So this is an exact resin model of the Lucara diamond. So if you were standing at the top of that one, and it's an 8 meter drop, and you let this thing go, it only has to, and what people don't understand is the real diamond, you can't scratch it. That's what it does, what makes a diamond special. But it's a crystal. It will break on a defined crystallographic plane. That's why diamonds are actually very easy to break. So for the ladies in the audience, don't hit your ring on the granite counter too hard, because you can actually break it. If you hit it in the right place, you can actually cleave the stone. It's not going to fall out of the clasps. But actually, a friend of my wife's, she went to get her diamond reset, and they took it out of the clasp and it broke into 3 pieces. So I know that it does happen. So to break a large diamond, and I mentioned this at the London Business School a couple of weeks ago, it is much easier to break a large diamond than what it is to break a small diamond. This puppy actually had to go through an 8 meter drop, 6 to 8 meter drop over there, and it's not necessarily the fall. It's the 400 millimeter rock that comes after it that just plows into it that is potentially going to break it. Through the stockpile, into the autogenous mill, where it most probably sits, it's like having an enormous washing machine, 7.8 meter diameter. It holds about 220 tons of material. This stone churned around in there for the better part of between 15 and 30 minutes before it was spat out. Then it went through a couple of screens, a couple of transfers before it was actually ejected by the XRT machines. The reason why this piece over here, and there's different theories. It could have been cleaved off on the drop. It could have been cleaved off during emplacement. So 90 million years ago, when the kimberlite actually brought into the surface, it could have been broken during the blast. We're not going to be able to have an exact number. But if it was whole when it came into the process plant, what the Mega Diamond Recovery will do It picks it up before it gets to any potential area where we can potentially damage and reduce the value of the stone. So when I talk about the large, that's just the maximum size. That's why it's called the mega diamond recovery. More importantly, it goes down to about 45 or 50 millimeters. So we're targeting stones all the way down to maybe 180, 200 carats. Will be recovered long before it gets to any point where we're potentially going to damage the stone. So as I've mentioned before, we're not actually mining diamonds, we're mining money. And this is an integral part of recovery of that money before there's a chance to rip the notes up. Robert didn't tell me that a lot of your currency is now worthless. So when I got to the store yesterday and pulled out my 20s and 50s, the guy went, man. So we're not doing that. We're not ripping up the money, we're trying to recover it whole. If you want to pass it around. The real stone is about 5 times that weight. So when you hold it, it's always cold and it's really heavy. And then the submiddles. So that's this area. You can see there's 3 or 4 cranes active in that area. So what we have, and it might be one of the distinguishing factors of why we actually have so many large stones, is we have a very, very fresh kimberlite. Unlike any other kimberlite, and there's only about 3 or 4 mines on the planet that I haven't been to. It is a very, very fresh kimberlite, which means that it has a lot of what actually makes up the Earth's mantle. So if you go 200 kilometers down, there's lots of iron. So in our kimberlite, we have a much larger component of high density material. So when we put it through the standard plant, which is this little building over here, just ahead of the recovery, where a normal kimberlite would have a yield of 1 to 2%. Ours is sometimes 15, sometimes 20%. So what the XRT technology does is it recovers diamonds without having to look at or concentrate it into the density or a parcel of high density material. So the simplicity which the XRT machines actually bring to the process, it takes 6 unit processors. So what you can't really see, you have to really zoom in. That little plant over there draws 1.1 megawatt of power. It's the highest operating cost part of the entire process plant, including the mill, including the crushers, because it consumes ferrosilicon. And I've had my ops team when I was at Victor actually went through around about 12 to 13 tons of ferrosilicon in an 8-hour shift. At $5,000 a ton, you can imagine how quickly the OPEX goes up. So as we've added in a lot of complexity, when we first built it, that building wasn't there, there was none of this, it was just a conveyor that came out there. As we've added complexity, because we've taken material away from the DMS plant, we've actually seen a reduction in our overall operating costs. So we're now doing that again. But what it also does is, if you look at this is the open pit, that material around there, that around there, and there's some on the other side here, is all stockpiled material. This is high grade material, which we haven't been able to process through the plant because the yield from that material is too high. As soon as, this one, actually the plant is shut down at the moment, don't panic. It's just because they're tying that in. So the plant will be up and running again on Friday next week. And it's essentially we do then plan, following Monday we should have a press release saying Mega Diamond Recovery is up and running. And then this section over here is scheduled for commissioning late September, early October. Once that's done, as I mentioned before, our capital programs are finished. No more money being spent except for $7 to $8 million of sustaining capital, which is what we've been saying for the past 4 years. And we can then process any of that material. High grade, low grade, regardless of what it is, whether we think it has large diamonds, whether it has more diamonds, anything can actually go through the process plant. And that runs hand in hand with wanting to move more waste to get access to the south lobe, which opens up flexibility and gives us a lot more efficiency through the plant. The next 2 slides talk to, we generally, you won't find people, but I think it is a very important aspect. So going through 5 million hours without a lost time injury is actually quite an achievement. Very recently we had what I consider to be quite a foolish lost time injury. A guy hammered his thumb, fractured it, and we lost a couple of days worth of work, but it drops out 5 million hours. It's almost actually more than 2 years of operating a mine without actually injuring someone. And it's quite an achievement, and it's one of the things that I think the guys on site are very, very proud of. And then obviously onto our corporate social responsibility. It's not something which we do because we have to. I think it's something that we do because we want to, and you can see the results. And it's taken quite a while. When we first started, and specifically the KEEF, the Karoo Emerging Entrepreneurs Fund, when we first started it, the business consultant which we have in that Lucara, he would go out and he would look for projects, and people would bring project plans to us, and it's based on sound economics. I do not believe in just giving money away. You give money to people so they can actually drive a business, return the money to you, and that money can then go to the next one. And that's pretty much how we're doing it. And for the first 2 years, the guys, I'll be honest, the guys really struggled. They would have business things and it wasn't going well. And out of the 10 projects which we started with, 8 of them are actually now paying money back into the fund. So we're now building up those grant funds again so we can start to redistribute them. We'll look at, I think we've got our third round coming out quite soon. But it's interesting because it's taken quite a while. But as the people have become more au fait, they've actually developed the entrepreneurial skills to understand where the value is driven. And we are very proud to be a part of this. And it actually was then testament when we were awarded the 2016 Prospectors and Developers Association CSR Award. So what we're actually doing, how we actually engage the communities. And when I did the acceptance thing there, I said to them, it's not about just giving. The most important thing that you can do when it comes to corporate social is listen. Sit in the communities. We have 8 local communities, and Carly, who's our CSR lady, she attends, it's called a kotla. And kotla is just a big tree, so it's a meeting under a big tree. When it's 40 degrees Celsius, it's normally quite welcome. But she attends them. Every single, over a 3-month period, she'll go to each and every village, she sits down, she listens, and we tell them what we're doing. We're not asking them for anything. If we're recruiting a new general manager, we'll say, we're doing this. We know that they don't have a person there that can replace him, but we want them to be informed of everything which we're doing. And the chiefs and the elders get to come to site sort of normally once every half year, we give them a meal, we take them around, we show them what we're doing. And through that process, we've actually developed a very strong relationship, which I think will sort of keep us in good stead with them moving forward. So jumping onto exploration, that is our bulk sample plant. You can see water everywhere, lots of rain, water all over there. Not something that you would commonly see in Botswana. So number one, the resource update which we're doing for the AK6 kimberlite. So this is what we're mining. We have north, centre and south lobe. I think interesting, you got to remember that this light green and the light blue is what it was on surface. So this big bulge which you see out here, which you can't quite make out because it comes out of the page, is the largest surface area, but it's at a depth of 120 meters. So if you imagine you're starting off small at the top and then it's bulging out. To access the full surface area, the amount of waste that you have to strip to get down there is much larger. It's one of the reasons why we're moving a lot more waste over the next 2 years, is to make sure that we get access to this full surface area versus just what we have access to now. So in the south lobe, when we started off, we do mine, so the end of the pink there is at 400 meters. There was a world record set for the deepest 24-inch diameter hole. We didn't have to pay for it, thank goodness. Down to 758 meters. So we know that the kimberlite is open well beyond that. To 2026, we're only mining to about 320 meters, which is around there. So why would, if you're mining diamonds which the world has a massive demand for, why would you stop in 2026? So the 10,000 meter drill program, which we've just completed, and it gets these little yellow pierce points in here, is to extend this pink area down to about 600, 650 meters. So the pink indicated, the blue is inferred. We need to have the resource in at least an indicated category before we can do a 43-101 compliance study to actually look at underground mining. So the resource update for this one, material is at the Saskatchewan Research Council, at least on its way, which means it's kind of out of our hands. We're waiting for them to come back with the results. We expect that to be complete most probably end of the third quarter into the fourth quarter, and subsequently post that we are out for selection of the contractor for our underground study, and then we'll go, and do we actually continue? Do we have another 8, 10, 12, 15 years of life of mine? If I'm still doing this talk to you guys in 23 years time, then I've really upset Lucas. So as you can see, if we're only mining down to here, there's a lot of potential to continue to pull out these large stones for many, many years into the future. So underground study, I would love to say Q4, but I'm guessing we're probably Q1 next year. And then when we start to look at the risks associated with it, I'm going to say this, it's going to be around the hydrology. We do mine through a mudstone layer, which is fairly easy, that's just geotech. But we do also go through the Nsani sandstones, and that's where we actually have an aquifer. So it's how much is it going to cost to make sure that the mine remains dry and safe in which to operate. And I think that's going to be one of the key factors in determining the underground potential. And then onto the exploration. As I'm sure with most of you, I think that the BK2 results were a little bit disappointing, both to management. So $57 a carat for the diamonds there. If you modeled it, you can get up to about 85. Oddly enough, the Arapa mine, which they've been mining at for now 43 or 44 years, also has around about $80, $85 a carat. So it's not that it's uncharacteristic in that area. Problem is that the grade is exceptionally low. They're mining around about 80 carats, 100 tons. Ours is about 6, 5.5, 6. So it just doesn't have the legs to be economic. So we're not going to just sort of put it aside. We've got a nice parcel of diamonds there, but we are going to keep it. We're not going to let the license lapse. We'll just sort of renew it and just keep it in the fold. And I'll come back to why we're doing that. AK11, it's under a significant amount of crater infill fascia and some sort of Kalahari sands. So we're waiting for the micro diamond work before we actually get in there for a large diameter drill program. We are planning on doing a couple of large diameter drill holes. We have to get a sample of macro diamonds. Let's at least see what the diamonds are worth. It's pointless saying there are diamonds down there, but we don't actually know what they're worth, because the value of the diamonds is really what's going to drive whether we continue. 13 and 14, interesting sort of dark-like features. I'm not going to spend a lot of money there. We do have budget set aside for 1 or 2 large diameter holes if the micro diamond comes back and it's interesting. But I remember when we got to, a good couple of years ago, when we got to $100 million of cash, our share price just would not move, regardless of what we did. And every meeting I went into, people would say, so what are you going to do with your cash? Fearful that we were going to waste it. Oddly enough, don't know what you guys have done with it, but I hope you didn't waste it. But it's exactly the same way that we're actually running our exploration program. We're not going to continue, and I think there is a habit of exploration companies to continue to put money into the ground, hoping for a different result. It's the same as when you were younger and you went to your father and he said no, so you went and asked your mother, hoping to get a different answer. We're not going to continue to spend money hoping that the economics are going to be there. Look, if it was marginal and we had 15 CPHT and a value of $200 a carat, we would continue to spend money. It may not make the grade, but you only have to do a small step up. We're looking at leaping up to the next level. So that's the reason why we're not going to spend more money on BK2. But otherwise, what we did do last year, and when we originally applied for these licenses in 2014, the one that we wanted was this one. BK16, that one. And the reason why is, historically, there's been more work done on it. It's had most probably 2 owners, but the grades are in and around what we're mining at Karowe. Somewhere between 16 and 20 carats per 100 tons. But insufficient work has been done on it to actually prove what the value of the diamonds are. But it has size, it has the grade. Let's just see what the final number is what the value is. Unfortunately, Tadilo picked it up. So when they went out to raise money at the end of last year, we took a strategic 10% stake in Tadilo. We will monitor what those results look like, but we'd rather, and what we did was we ring-fenced the $2.5 million that we put into the financing to be used only on the project. They have 2 other projects, I think one is copper, one is iron ore, and we made sure that the money wouldn't be spent there. We want to make sure that our money is actually going into the ground for the analysis of BK16. So even though it's not within our exploration portfolio, we are still to a certain extent funding the asset which we originally wanted. So just quickly, I'm not going to touch too much on this. Outlook, even though we're selling a lot less carats, revenue hasn't changed from last year. And I think a lot of people go, well, you're selling 60,000 carats less. We still plan, because of where the diamonds are coming from, to sell between $200 $220 million. And I think when the results come out for the second quarter, you'll then see that, for the half year, we're trending bang on where we actually should be. And I'm sure somebody would like to know, yes, we do have 1 or 2 stones already set aside for the next exceptional stone tender. And I'm going to jump down. I'm not going to jump anyway. We've already spoken about the high operating costs compared to where we were last year, mostly centered around the increase in waste stripping. And then these 2 numbers here, the $15 to $18 million, we're slightly under the budget for the mega diamond recovery. And then we've added in 1 or 2 things, so we almost sort of come in on the $30 million, and that's the end of it. There is nothing, odd enough, I don't think there's anything else we can actually do to the process plant to continue to enhance it. I think we've gotten to the end of the road. And that's when with the $100 million we spent over the last 3 years, that expenditure now comes to an end, and hopefully more money for increased dividends. And then it says up to. And the reason why we've left the words in up to is we don't actually plan to spend 10 million. As we get the results, we'll make a decision, understand where value is added as far as the exploration program goes, and adjust it accordingly. So we will just close off, and we already spoke about these, the 145 diamonds larger than or greater than, for more than $1 million, and you can actually see the numbers. There are very few mines out there, even ones who have been operating for 30, 40 years, who actually can tout those two numbers. 23 stones for more than $5 million. There are mines out there that have actually been operating for way, way longer than what I've actually been in the diamond industry, and they cannot actually replicate those. So these are mines that are actually producing 10, 15 million carats a year for 30 years, and they don't have stats like specifically those bottom two. I'm sure that they struggle to come up with 120 stones larger than or higher than $1 million as well. But again, I mention it because what we're actually mining here, the world has never seen. And oddly enough, as we mine more of it, I had a question the other day. People said to me, well, what can the mine actually, what is the maximum? So based on the size of the pit, De Beers did this study that said that you could actually get to 4 million tons per annum. And yes, we could go out there, we could spend some more money, increase the size of the process plant, get another fleet in, and actually start mining. But all that we're going to do is devalue the value of these stones. We actually do have an active process where we look at how long and what the cyclic process is of when people come to bid. So if somebody wins a stone and they pay a lot of money for it, we watch how quickly and what their bidding behavior is to understand if there is a saturation point for those stones. Us going to 4 million tons per annum will actually devalue the special product which we actually have. And again, we're just looking at I've mentioned all of these before, but it's worthwhile just reiterating them. Not just in the large stones, it's the average value which we have. $650 a carat is very achievable, the 824 including the constellation. Our dividend policy, which I mentioned, we're planning on growing. We've had very strong growth in it, and we look to continue that. And I think with I'm sure that there's a very extensive debate to have when we start to look at M&A activity, our exploration programs, how we're actually going to grow it. But when you have an asset similar to what we have, it's fairly difficult to find something which is going to be value accretive in excess of our current dividend policy. I don't want something which is going to add 3 cents onto our earnings per share. We've got to have something which actually exceeds our current 10 cents and then is value accretive. And that's kind of our criteria when we start to look at M&A activity. So I'm not going to spend too much time because I know that all of you have read the Bain report because it is a thrilling read. But the next 2 slides actually talk about the supply-demand fundamentals of the market. And there was an article, so we produced 300,000 carats out of 130 million. It's a very small pile in the corner compared to what everybody else produces. And about 6 weeks ago, I'd said at the end of our quarterly that we were still a little bit cautious about where the diamond market was going. And there was a reporter that actually said, what I say carries a lot of weight. So we've actually looked at the market, and I think very much for our stones, but in general, go and jump through that one. The diamond market is stronger than what I've ever seen it, especially sort of in my time with Lucara. There's a lot of liquidity, there's a lot of availability of money. People are spending a lot more on rough diamonds. We've got improvements in the market out in China. Hong Kong is now starting to see an increase in the sales of diamond jewelry. If you look at the results for Chow Tai Fook and Tiffany, all very strong indicators that markets which have been suppressed for the past 4 or 5 years are now definitely coming back. So the demand which we see, the increase in liquidity, and the liquidity I talk about is in the middle market. It's those people that buy diamonds from us, polish them, and then sell them on to the final retailers. They have money to buy, and that's critically important. Because if they have money, it means that they are managing the debt ratio, which ranges between $12 to $16 billion in the middle market. So it's those specific indicators which give us a lot of confidence in the strength of not just what we have, but in the diamond market as a whole. The 3 new mines which were brought on stream at the back of last year and have now sort of been ramping up to full production will add, it's probably the better part of 8 to 9 million carats of production. Oddly enough, a lot of people would have expected diamond prices to drop because of that in terms of the overall supply demand. But we haven't. We've seen diamond prices continue to strengthen. De Beers are sort of increasing prices 2 or 3% in certain categories, down in some other ones, depending on where the demand is. But all of these factors actually show us that the demand for diamonds, the quality that we're producing specifically, and what everybody else is producing is definitely being bought up by the middle market. One other thing that I'll add to that is, with those 3 mines now being brought into production, there is only 1, maybe 2 significant projects where they've been discovered and they've got a timeline of when these things will be brought to market. But after that, with no money being spent on exploration, there's nothing. So it is still a very, very bullish outlook for the supply-demand fundamentals as far as what rough diamonds go. I'll close off just with a little bit on synthetics. Synthetics are not a threat, they're a reality. And if you want to go out and buy synthetic, by all means. And I think there will always be a market for synthetics. There will be odd enough, the research says that a male won't buy a synthetic, a female will, and the male won't buy it because he doesn't want to come off as being cheap. But a lot of we hear a lot about millennials, and millennials they don't want diamonds because sort of what it actually means in terms of the environmental aspects, etc. Therefore, they might buy synthetic. The example that we use is if you find somebody who desperately wants a Louis Vuitton bag, but they can't afford it, there's a good chance they're going to go down to the street corner and they're going to buy a fake. But when they can afford it, they will go out and they will buy a Louis Vuitton bag. Millennials are currently still living at home. They don't have money to go out and buy diamonds. So is the logic then true that they may buy synthetic because it means they're going to have more money for other things, a better honeymoon, and this is what the research has shown. But when they do have the money and the sort of, I guess, the free cash flow that their parents have, are they actually going to go out and buy a natural stone? And by the time they do that, the supply-demand fundamentals, which shows a steady decrease in the production of rough diamonds, is going to maintain the value for what we're actually talking about today. And I think that's it. Questions? Yes?
What is a carat? How much does it weigh?
0.2 grams.
0.2 grams.
Yes. So
Is a carat in diamonds the same as in gold?
no, an ounce is in gold. An ounce is 32 grams.
But gold, you see, you get 14, 18.
Oh no, completely separate. Two separate things. The carat weight in gold is a percentage of gold in the gold. So 24 karat gold is 100% gold. The reason why you get 9, 12, etc. is because they add in copper to actually strengthen it, because gold is very soft and malleable. So,
Where did the carat, where did it come from?
in the olden days, they actually used the seeds from the carob tree, which were very, very consistent in weight, to determine multiple things. So you would actually have, the seeds of the carob tree are all the exact same weight. It's just one of those anomalies in nature. Carob tree. It's found in the Middle East. And the weight of a single carob seed is 0.2 grams. So that's where it comes from. So carob, the word carob actually comes from the seeds from the carob tree.
0.2 grams.
0.2 grams, yes. So 5 carats to the gram. Yes?
I'm just wondering how big diamonds can they do by this?
Synthetics. So, what would you like? And that could be the question. Talk about it. So there are 2 primary mechanisms for creating a synthetic that they're using. One is chemical vapor deposition. So you actually you take a piece of natural diamond and you create a carbon vapor and you grow it. Very similar to how your kids would grow sugar crystals on a piece of string when they were at school. With that one, because there's no pressure to force the diamond molecules, the crystal structure will break down at around about 3 or 4 carats rough, which would translate into a 1 to 1.5 carat polish on the maximum. They can actually change the composition and change, but it starts to become a bit complicated from a chemistry perspective. The other mechanism, which De Beers have been sort of, they actually painted it along with GM or GE, most probably back in the 60s, is synthesizing the conditions 200 kilometers down. So you're actually creating an atmosphere, or conditions where it's about 63 to 65 atmospheres at 12 to 1400 degrees Celsius. So you take carbon and you put it under enormous pressure and temperature, and you actually simulate the creation of the diamond. But what people don't understand, if you have a diamond which is, you can't see, 1 millimeter in sort of dimension, the surface area is X. If you take a diamond which is 2 millimeters, the surface area is to the third power of that. So the growth rate of a crystal actually slows down by sort of the cube root, and there's a whole lot of math in there. So when you want to grow something, if you want to grow something which is that big, the exponential increase in time to get to that large is very, very high. So if you have time to grow a stone for 6 months, a year, I'm not sure how quickly they grow, but you could actually grow whatever size you wanted under the high temperature, high pressure. So what we breathe is majority nitrogen, and it's nitrogen which gives diamonds their yellow color. It's the impurity within a diamond. That's how sort of most diamonds are actually recovered. So when you actually run these presses in this environment, all the diamonds come out bright yellow because of the nitrogen which it contains. You can now run those, they do run those presses in a reducing environment where they extract all the nitrogen, but it's expensive. To run a press for 6 months at 1200 degrees Celsius at 63 to 65 atmospheres is not an inexpensive process. So the cost, and you must probably bring a whiteboard next time. So if you imagine sort of the growth rate, because of the cube root of the area, it's going to look something like, it'll very, very quick, and then it's going to slow down, and it'll just continue to slow down until it just runs off, and it's going to take you forever to grow it. But the cost curve will run the other way. And where those intersect is the economic point of what the maximum size is. But if you wanted somebody and you had a lot of money and you had the time, you could most probably grow any size you wanted to within the confines of the press. So it's like a funny, almost anvil type thing. And the amount of carbon that they can actually put in there, they wouldn't be able to grow a stone as large as the Lucara. The largest polished synthetic that I've seen is only 10 carats. Very long answer, but yeah.
Yeah, there is a specific problem for Swedish shareholders concerning the Canadian withholding tax. Is that something that you are aware of?
Yes, we are aware of it.
Is it something that you can help us with?
We've looked into it, and sort of our CFO was supposed to be here. If you give me your email address, I can sort of get him to send you a message. There's not much that we can do. I know that you guys get emails quite heavily on the tax side, both withholding tax and then the what we would call capital gains tax. At this point, there's not much which we believe we can do about it. We have looked at it and how we actually get money into country, but then it becomes us that ends up paying the tax, and we still get round about the same amount.
Thank you.
Do buybacks be done, or do we discuss this?
Well, let's see. You would most probably be the 5th person to mention buybacks. So I'll take off my shirt. I'll show you the 3 stripes I have on my back, where I've gone to the board and said, we should look at a buyback. A number of our board members have a fairly bad experience with buybacks. It's not that I haven't taken it to the board. We've been there 3 times. It is something which I think the board will consider, but it's going to be, I think, fairly distant down the road versus a dividend.
And synthetic buybacks, that will make the taxation easier for Swedes with the ISK.
Sorry, synthetic buybacks.
Yeah, and to dividend, you give out part of the, give some of the stock back to the share.
Oh yes, I'll have to ask Glenn about that.
Maybe you could choose between that and ordinary.
There might be a solution, and we must only do need to spend a little bit more time. I'm not sure. How many
looked at it, and it was not feasible. That's why it's not feasible.
and registered shares we have in Sweden? About 90 million. I think with
That sounds about right, yeah.
So before I then finish, I was notified that sort of there is so in September the International Kimberlite Conference will be held down in Botswana. I knew that there were 2 trips into site, and sort of it's a fairly expensive trip down there, but apparently there is a trip into site if you register for, I think it's kind of like a ladies ticket, so you don't have to sit through, if you thought my presentation was boring. Sorry, I didn't say that. But some of them are very technical geological presentations, which you'd be thrilled to go and sit in. But apparently there is a mine tour. But as you exit here, what Lucara did at the beginning of the year was we actually had a team down on site, and they ran around with drones, etc. And we have a full 3D virtual reality tour of the mine. You can download it. There's an app on the Apple Store. There's the app on the Android Store, and the app is called
Lucara 360.
Lucara 360. You can also just log on to www.lucara360.com on your iPhone, and it'll take you through it. But when everybody leaves here, the boxes that were out there, those are virtual reality goggles, and they look like this. So, yes. So, you are all free to take a pair for listening to me talk for 45 minutes an hour. Log on to either through the app. The app allows you to look at it wherever. Through the website, you actually have to be logged on to have a look at it. Phone fits in there. It has focus knobs on the side and a focus one on the top. You can have a look at. There's a whole lot of hotspots on the website. There's video. There's sort of animation. If you go into the mine, you can actually go below the ground and have a look at the 3D model of the resource itself. There's footage of the mill running, the XRTs running. There's some sort of interviews that we've done with some of the people on site, with the geologists, etc. So inspect as much as what you like. It's exactly the same as being there. My recommendation is do it in a swivel chair. Doing it standing up makes you feel like you're going to throw up. But in a swivel chair, because what most people do is they just look. But because it's virtual reality, you have to look all the way around, up, down. But there's a little piece of card or a card in the boxes which tells you exactly what to do. So that's our gift to you. Enjoy. And pretty much it's the same as, sort of, no offense, it's the same as spending money to go down to the mine site, because it'll give you a very good feel of what we've actually done. Over time, we will actually enhance the app. It is in HD at the moment, and they're looking at sort of increasing it, which means that the app is a fairly large download. But sort of I've played with it quite a bit, more in going through just to make sure that everything was actually correct. But it is a fun afternoon. And the goggles are yours. But thank you very much for coming.